Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to this webinar on best practices for manuscript review. It is sponsored by the Society for Immune Polymorphism, or SIP. My name is Aisha, and I'll be acting as your moderator and host for this webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a couple of quick things. One is this event is being recorded, and the other is that if you'd like to pose a question, please type it into the chat feature of the webinar interface, and then we'll present it to our speakers after both of the presentations. And if applicable, please be sure to include who the question should be directed to. We have an excellent group of experts to talk with us today. Joining us as speakers are Dr. James Mathew from Northwestern University. His lab's research focuses on the use of donor stem cells and recipient regulatory T cells for clinical transplant tolerance and also identification of biomarkers of immune reactivity or tolerance in transplant patients. And we also have Dr. Danillo Augusto from the University of North Carolina, and his lab uses genomic and transcriptomic approaches to study human genetic diversity and its implication in disease, with a special focus on diseases that are neglected or understudied, and also in underrepresented populations in genomics. And before we get into the talks, I want to take just a quick moment to give two announcements of upcoming events. We have the SIP Annual General Meeting December 4th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And for the first 15 minutes, we'll cover society business. That will be followed by two keynote presentations and then a panel discussion. We have two excellent talks lined up, one from Dr. Jill Hollenbach and another from Paul Norman, both on recent publications of some really exciting research. This meeting will be members only, but you can register to join for as a member still and attend. There's still plenty of time. Here on the screen is the QR code and also the link to join the SIP Society. It's a really wonderful society. It's really a lot of opportunities for interaction. It's a great group to be involved in if you're a trainee. So I highly encourage you to please join us and participate. The other opportunity and upcoming event or deadline is for a special issue that we have at Frontiers in Immunology, and the research topic is a new perspective in immune polymorphism. And so we just need the summary submissions will be due December 1st here in a couple of weeks, but the actual manuscript won't be due until February 29th of next year. And with that, I would like to go ahead and hand the floor over to Dr. Mathew.
Thank you, Aisha. I hope you can see my screen. Okay. Thank you, everybody. First of all, I have to apologize in case my nose is blocked, so to say, allergy. Anyway, in addition to my research, I'm an associate editor or academic editor in a number of journals, and I am going to be the editor-in-chief of Human Immunology from January onwards. Now, this slide shows an outline of our presentation today. I will talk about what is peer review, who can become a reviewer, how to become a reviewer, then hand it over to Dr. Danillo Augusto, who will describe the step-by-step guide to reviewing manuscript, how to structure your reports, and how to give your comments to the editors and the recommendations, and also about reviewing the revision. Now, coming to becoming a reviewer. Now, this is what happens. A manuscript is submitted. It goes to the editor-in-chief of the journal, who makes a cursory or takes a look at the manuscript. This is the screen or the materials, the actions that is available to the editor-in-chief and the other editors. The editor-in-chief will look at the submission, check for any similarities, and then Look for the suitability of the manuscript for the journal. Check if there is any deficiency. If there is any deficiency, the editor-in-chief rejects the manuscript. Unfortunately, in this era of uh, majority of the submissions come under this category. So the editor-in-chief has got a lot of work to do. Then, if the manuscript is suitable for the journal, the editor-in-chief hands it over to, uh, assigns it to an editor, associate editor, who again goes through the manuscript a little bit more thoroughly, and then the associate editor can also reject the manuscript in most journals like Human Immunology and where I am involved. But if the associated editor finds the manuscript to be suitable, invites and sends the manuscript to the reviewers. The reviewers submit their comments to the associate editors, and the associate editor gets all the different reviews and recommendations and submits a recommendation to the editor-in-chief, and who in turn can accept or ask for revision or altogether rejects the manuscript. In some journals, the associate editor has the authority to do that. Human Immunology is one of them. Now, what is peer review? Peer review is designed to assess the validity, quality, and often the originality of the articles for publication. It maintains the integrity of science by filtering out invalid or poor quality articles. From a journal's perspective, filtering out content, directing better quality papers creates a journal brand, for example, Science, Nature, Human Immunology, whatever. So it creates a brand, and the review process adds value to them. So review is very essential from the perspective of the journal. Now, in a recent article in British Journal of Medicine, a paper appeared. The authors interviewed a whole lot of editors of major journals, and they published their findings. And there was agreement among the journal editors that the peer reviewers are experts in their field when they have expertise and demonstrate high level of knowledge in their subject areas and are up to date with existing evidence and practice guidelines and have experience of publishing their own research. And one of them mentioned that peer reviewers should be dutiful towards scientific community versus volunteers who deserve just recognition. But take heart, who can become a reviewer? Anyone who is an expert in the research field of the article's field of research. Occasionally, the editors may ask you to look at a specific aspect of the article. For example, statisticians look at the statistics portion of the article. And also, a specialist may be asked to review, let's say, a methodology, a new methodology. Is it accurate? Things like that can be asked of you to review, not the whole manuscript. And you can be at any stage of your career. Actually, junior faculty and postdoctoral fellows often write the best reviews because they tend to be insecure and tend to overcompensate and be very careful in doing a good job. So take heart. Now, why become a reviewer? Again, journal editors are looking for reviewers. The review pool is increasing, which means there is always demand for particular area of expertise. Getting involved in peer review can be rewarding because it can improve your own research, informs you what is happening in the field, gives you an in-depth understanding of the topic that you are an expert in. Also, it can further your career. For example, peer reviewer experience is a criterion for promotion for junior faculty. Now, before you establish yourself as a researcher, you should obtain an ORCID ID. That is to distinguish yourself. Open Researcher and Contributor ID or ORCID is a unique and persistent identifier that distinguishes you from every other research and connects you to your research activities. So you will get the credit always for your work. Now, funders, institutions, and societies can easily identify you using this ORCID that you have created. You don't have to waste time entering repetitive data when reporting on your past activities. Your professional activities are clearly linked back to you, and you can easily comply with funder mandates. Also, uh, you can get recognition. Uh, for that, you can build your profile on Web of Science Reviewer Recognition Service. It used to be called previously as Pablon. Pablon records your reviewer activity as a measurable research output, and ensures that you get credit for each completed review. You can link your ORCID ID with your Pablon account and opt in to have your Pablons automatically export your review history to your ORCID profile. You can also claim continuing medical education credits for your review activity. Get your reviewer recognition certificate. You can do that. I remember I arranged for a number of certificates for very active reviewers for human immunology. Now, how to become a reviewer? There are no one way to become a reviewer. Common routes include asking a colleague to recommend you, network with editors at conferences and seminars. Uh, we at Dr. Danillo and myself will welcome you to. You're welcome to send your info to us. We can add you to Human Immunology and other journals in which we are involved. Now, you can contact journals directly, volunteer on their websites. You can seek mentorship from a senior colleague. You can work with the senior researchers who may then delegate peer review duties to you. For example, I remember my own postdoctoral advisor used to give me the articles coming to review to him. He would critique my review. Of course, he would submit his own reviews. After doing that, then he started recommending me to review articles. Now, I do that same thing with my own mentees. Now, you can also find a journal with a mentoring program. Uh, uh, Soon, we are planning to start a mentoring program for human immunology. Now, when you are identified as a reviewer, and an invitation letter comes to you. The content, the invitation looks somewhere like this: the manuscript number, the title, the authors, uh, dear you, I would like to invite you to review as you are an expert in this field. Abstract is below. Please consider this review as confidential. Please respond as soon as possible. If you would like to review the paper, please click on this link. If you have a conflict of interest or do not wish to review this paper, click on this link. Now, if you decline to review, I would appreciate suggestion of alternative reviewers. You can get credit, editor's name, and the abstract. Now, before you accept or decline an invitation, consider the following questions. Does the article match your area of expertise? Only accept what you feel you can provide a high quality review. Do you have a potential conflict of interest? Disclose this to the editor when you respond. Do you have time? Reviewing can be a lot of work. Before you commit, make sure you can meet the deadline. Respond to the invitation as soon as you can, even if you decline. A delay means more waiting time for others. Now, when you are other, you are anxious. So be considerate. If you do decline the invitation, it would be helpful if you can provide suggestions for alternative reviewers. If you accept, you must treat the material you receive as confidential. This means you cannot share them with anyone without prior authorization from the editor. You also must not share the information about the review with anyone without permission from the editors and the authors. Now, this is a recent phenomenon. Managing your review and the use of generative artificial intelligence. Now, the reviewing a scientific paper implies the responsibilities that can be done only by the humans. The critical thinking and assessment are outside of the scope of generative AI. Now, submitted manuscripts should be treated as confidential with regard to the AI. You should not upload the manuscript or any part of it into the AI tool, as there is no guarantee where the materials are going to be sent, saved, or viewed, or even how they may be used in the future. It may also violate the terms of the use of the generative AI tool. This confidentiality requirement extends to the peer review report, not only the article itself, the report, any other communication about a manuscript, including notifications and decision letters. They should not be uploaded to a generative AI tool, even if it is just for the purpose of improving your own language and the readability of your review. So AI is out of review process. So with that, I would like to hand over the presentation to Dr. Danillo Augusto. He will describe the step guide to reviewing a manuscript. Thank you.
Is my screen being shared right now? Okay, fantastic. So thank you, James, for the great presentation. And also thanks for the Society for Immunopolymorphism for this invitation. I'm very happy to be talking about about reviewing a manuscript, and I will share some of my experience as an editor for several journals and after handling so many papers. So I hope that you can like the talk, and if you have questions, you can post in the chat in the end of the talk. I think the first question is, why did you receive an invitation to review? So when we are an associate editor for a journal and we invite a person, there is a reason for that. And I think it's because as an editor, we believe, as Dr. Mathew just mentioned, that you have expertise. And this expertise it could be a broad expertise in the field, but also could be a specific topic or specific disease. It could be a specific method or data analysis. And the way that the editor sees your expertise in some of those aspects is looking for publications. So based on your track record of publications and your influence in the field. But what I want to emphasize here is that you do not necessarily to have expertise in all aspects of a paper. Sometimes we invite reviewers that are experts in different aspects, for example, different methods or specific diseases, and the reviewers are complementary to each other. So I'm going to give an example. I was having a very hard time once to find reviews for a paper, which was a randomization study, Mendelian randomization study in a rare disease. And some of the reviewers that I invited was replying back, said, oh, I don't have experience on this disease, but they were experts in Mendelian randomization. So do not necessarily need to have expertise in all aspects, because another reviewer will cover that expertise. And another example is a highly cited paper in Human Immunology, in which one of the reviewers did not have expertise on HLA, for example, but they were an expert on prediction of protein structure, and they provide like a fantastic report for that paper. So if you are unsure that you have expertise for that paper, you can always reply back to the editor, talk to the editor, and if you feel that you're not in your topic, you can just decline. But think about that when you see an invitation, because it could be that the editor is expecting maybe your expertise in a specific point. And what is expected from the reviewer? I think, as also Dr. Mathew just mentioned before, we are asking your most valuable currency, which is your time. And time is, we really appreciate your time as a reviewer. And we know that it takes time to write a good report, and we appreciate that. And during your review, there are several aspects that we as an editor will expect from the reviewer. So the first read through of the paper, we expect that the reviewer will provide some general considerations about what they just read. So, for examples, what is the main question addressed in this study? What is its relevance? Do you think that is interesting? This is current? This is relevant to the field? How does that advance the field right now? What about the originality? Has this similar study been done before? How does it compare with other published studies? We also want to have your input about how the paper is written. Is it like well written? Is it clear to read? Is clear to understand? Also, one very important point is it also written for a broad audience? Sometimes the paper is well written, but it's so difficult to understand for a person that is actually not very familiar with that topic or that study. So is this actually clear for all the public? Are the conclusions consistent with the evidence presented? So do the authors really address the main question? And is the data supporting the conclusions? Also, are the data consistent with the text? Sometimes we see papers that the figures and the tables, or maybe the data that is there, is pointing us to one direction, but the text is saying something a little bit different, or maybe it's not super consistent. So how is this consistency throughout the paper that you are reviewing? Another aspect would be figures and tables. Are they really adding something to this paper? Are they necessary? I mean, sometimes some figures are there, but they do not need to be there. Or sometimes they are there, but there's more items, more details needed for those figures or for those tables. So when you look to the paper in your first time that you read it, did the figures and tables help you to understand the paper? And did you think that those tables and figures were appropriate for the paper? And how about the references? Are they covering the current research? Are they really appropriate for the paper? Is there something missing? Are they really citing the papers that are the original source of the information? And did you spot a major or fatal flaw? So all those questions are those questions that we expect the reviewer to be able to write some comments about this in a general considerations when they are having the first read through to the manuscript. And those are more broad considerations, but they're very important because they will help us as editors to have also a broad view of the paper. Also remember that the editor might not necessarily be an expert on that field, so they need your expertise, and they need your you to be clear in your review for them to be able to actually make a decision. Then comes to the second read-through of the paper. That's when we expect a little bit more detailed information for some specific sentences or specific analysis. And I'm gonna go through to a quick overview of those right now. So now you go back to the paper, you already have your general comments, but let's be more specific right now. So for example, are there sentences that are unclear? Sometimes the paper is extremely well written, but this sentence does not make sense. So you can actually point that out and make a suggestion how to improve it. Or are there factual errors sometimes? This statement, I don't think this statement is true. Maybe it is not really what the original authors of the cited paper actually stated before. So this is an error. Is the title and the abstract really summarizing the message of the paper? What about the manuscript length? Maybe it's too short, I cannot really understand, but maybe it's too long, and there are some sentences or paragraphs there that are not needed. So we are expecting an editor to have some constructive criticism, not only saying what is wrong, but also suggestions of how to improve. Also, other questions are, does the introduction set out the argument? I mean, can I really understand what the authors want to do, or why they're going to do this study based on what is presented in the introduction? Does the introduction summarize the related research that has been published before? And are relevance and novelty presented in the introduction or in the paper itself? Can I really see what is different from other studies in this paper or in this introduction? And about the aims, do I know what the authors are really doing? The aims are clear. Next, we also have what we say like a language check. If you spot some specific error, you can mention maybe, well, say there's like an error in this table, I don't really understand, maybe it's just a typo, or maybe some sentences are unclear. But what we ask here is that as a reviewer, you do not try to fix language. If you really don't understand, if the language is really poor, you can just suggest to reject it. But if you notice that there are some issues with language, but you can understand the science, you can understand the core message, then you can suggest improvements, or you can suggest like a major review for language. You can give some specific examples, and examples are very good, because if you just say language is not great or there are some issues with language, if the authors knew that there was like issues with language, maybe they already have fixed before. So you don't need to fix the text, but you can just give an example. For example, you can say, oh, the grammar is not actually great. For example, look to this sentence that is consistent throughout the paper. Or you can say, oh, there is a problem with a lot of typos. Look at the sentence here. So just give a couple of examples and a suggestion about the language. And that will help the authors, because that's a good feedback for them, and also will help the editor to find or to spot those problems. Another aspect of your review is about the methods that have been used to that paper. For example, what about the sample size? Is that appropriate for this type of study? Did the authors do any replication of their findings? How about the controls? Are the controls appropriate? Are they biased? Are they really good controls for this type of experiment? Did they use controls for the cell culture or for the cytometry? Whatever methodology it is there. And more importantly are those methods repeatable? Is there enough detail for someone else repeat those experiments and get the same result? And this is very important. And also we ask that the review can actually be very detailed on those points and the recommendations. And if they find something that it doesn't look correct, point that out, make suggestions for improvement. In terms of data, we also expect the reviewer to give us a feedback about the accuracy of the data, if the statistical analysis that has been used for that paper is robust, if it's the correct approach of analysis, are the data well presented? Maybe the reviewer has a better idea of how to plot this data, and they can say, oh, maybe this figure is not great, but if you plot just this way, it will do much better. So this kind of like feedback is very beneficial for the authors and for the peer review process itself. And also, are the data supporting the conclusions? One thing that I would like also to mention is to avoid asking for more experiments. We have to have in mind that if the authors had how to do more experiments, they would probably have already done it and put in the paper. So sometimes it could be that, oh, this is a very easy experiment to do. Maybe the authors did not even think about it. Oh, maybe it's a good suggestion. But at the same time, if you're asking for a lot of experiments, maybe they're not even needed for the aims of this paper. Well, it would be great to have more experiments, but that's not actually the scope of the paper. So sometimes asking for more experiments, especially complicated experiments or expensive experiments, could be a little bit unfair to the authors at sometimes. For figures and tables, sometimes there are some errors or some typos, or maybe the presentation are not good, maybe the data is not really, there's a better way to plot it. Just gonna give an example. It's not uncommon to see this kind of problem in papers for like HLA alleles, for example. Sometimes Excel thinks that they are Excel is super smart, and they will write like HLA allele, and sometimes the Excel just changed for dates. For example, instead of B1501, it's going to be January 15, and sometimes we see those errors in published papers. So if you spot something like this, just please point that out. We also want to hear from the reviewers some ethical considerations. And here it's very important to remember that this should be sent confidentially to the editor. There is always a box in your system for peer review where it's like this comment will be only sent to the editor. And this is a good spot to actually write about ethical considerations. You might be suspecting that there is maybe plagiarism here, or maybe you are not confident with the data, maybe there is some data fabrication, maybe you spot too many self-citations and you think that maybe it's not the right way to do it. Or when you are reviewing the paper, you went to the PubMed to see prior research and you saw that those same authors are publishing a series of very similar papers in sequence, and what we normally say salami slicing, maybe that's something that you can bring to the editor. But don't make accusations, send those accusations to the author. So just mention this. The editor will appreciate your comments and will take a look, and then they will discuss what you do in that situation. Another important thing for us to think as a reviewer is that we should be aware of our own biases. And if you are human, you have biases. Every one of us have biases. And we should be aware of those biases and try to avoid that those biases will affect our peer review. So common bias in peer review is about nationality of the authors, the countries of where the research was developed. If sometimes this research comes from a small country, or for authors from a specific nationality, and sometimes reviewer already have some preconceptions about that research, or maybe it comes from top tier 1 university, and then they're more prone to accept the paper because of that. So we should be aware of those biases when we review, and try to be very conscious and fair during our process. Now I want to give you some examples of what not to do. And I've seen some, I've experienced a lot of, and those are all situations that happened when I was an editor. So a good example is like a 1-sentence review, or a very short review. Once I got this exactly comment from a reviewer, that all I had, this is a great paper and should be accepted. So when we have something like this, maybe the paper is really great and maybe really should be accepted, but this does not provide to the editor information to support that and actually to make a decision. So why this is great? Did you really not find any flaws in anything? So why do you have to be more specific? And then the editors can actually make a decision. But this itself doesn't provide the editor any support for any decision. Another comment that sometimes, not once, a few times I received was, oh, the results are good, but I suggest you reject because this manuscript is more suited to the journal X. And if the editor already sent you the review to review the paper, it's because the editors think that's a good fit for the journal, and that's not what the kind of review that we're expecting for the reviewer. And this is also something that happened and was a very tricky situation. That was the comment. I think the English language of this manuscript could be improved. Perhaps a check by a native speaker could be beneficial. And put in the context, there was no examples, nothing, and just put in the context is the first and the last authors had Asian last names. And then the authors reached out to me and they said, we are very offended and we think this is racist. And their response to the authors was, this is the first and the corresponding authors were born in the US. English is our native language, our native and sole language. And over 150 publications, this is the first time this has been brought to our attention. So this is related to what I just mentioned. Maybe we should be aware of our biases and be very careful. If there is a problem with language, give an example and say why you think that is a problem. And the last example of what not to do is I had one that it happened was this manuscript is incredibly well written. I wonder if the authors used ChatGPT. And in the context was a review paper written by 2 Indian women. So it feels like the assumption that those 2 authors would not be able to write an incredibly well-written paper unless they use artificial intelligence. So this kind of comments do not help the peer review process. So avoid those comments and focus on what is actually really needed. In terms of to structure a report, this is an example for human immunology. Those questions are asked for all reviewers, and they are asked to put 1 to 5 for several questions. So, is the information presented new? Is this appropriate for the journal? Are the figures and appropriate? So, and then from 1 to 5, the reviewers will give it like a score, and they can write comments of why they're giving those scores. And this is also a way to help the reviewers to prepare the report in the end. And in the end, what we actually want from the reviewers is like a recommendation, which could be accept, revise, or reject. And I just want to point out that this is a recommendation, and the decision will be taken by the editor based on your comments or based on how detailed you actually provided a report. And so if you think that this manuscript should be accepted, please write why. Give an example or say all the positive comments that you have about this paper, about the methods that they use, why you think that should be accepted. If you think that, okay, seems to be a good paper, but I have some questions or some things are unclear, maybe this analysis is not really appropriate, maybe they could do differently. So then you can recommend a revision, but please state the point by point changes that you think that should be made in that paper to improve it. And if you are suggesting to reject the paper, also please give details of why you think that this paper should be rejected. So, and at least the authors will have a feedback or a reasoning why you're saying that it's rejected, and the editor will know that you were very careful in your revision. You just did not reject because for any reason, but now you provide like a justification for that. So in the end, be rigorous, but be fair. And that's what I had to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Augusto and Dr. Matthew, for the wonderful presentations. We already have a lot of questions in our chat, so this is really great. I'm going to combine a couple that are related. So if I skip your question, don't be alarmed. I'll come back. One question is, how long do you have usually to review a paper? And I'm going to add to this, what if I agreed to do a review, but something came up and you need more time? And then another is, how long do you wait for a lazy reviewer to respond?
That's great. Great question.
Maybe I'll take that question. First, different journals have different length of time for the review to be submitted. Human Immunology, the default setting is 14 days. AJT, it's a little shorter, 10 days or something. Certain other, it is variable among journals. Now, how long the reviews, what happens if the reviewer doesn't submit the review in time? Of course, the system will automatically send in reminders. More than that, I personally, what I do is, if the reviewer is late, sometimes the system automatic reminders can go into the the scam folder and things like that. So the author may not see it. I mean the reviewer. So I send a personal letter to the reviewer, and usually that gets a response. Did I miss anything else?
Yeah, I can just mention the last part was how long to wait for the lazy reviewer. Sometimes the reviewer disappears and we have to wait a little bit. I think it's fair to wait. We don't know what happened. Maybe they got sick. Maybe something happened with their family. But most of the times, the reviewer, as James mentioned, if you write them a letter, they will say, "Oh, please give us 2 more weeks." Maybe they need 2 more weeks, and then it might be fine. You can wait 2 more weeks. But sometimes we can't. So it's very important for the reviewer to communicate with the editor. If the reviewer disappears, then maybe we may need to cancel the invitation or decide without that reviewer if you have enough from the other reviewers, or maybe invite an other person.
Mm.
Really, really helpful. We have a couple of questions related to acknowledgement of reviewing, and I think this is something that journals have been trying to work on because this can be a very time-consuming process depending on the complexity of the paper. So one of our questions is, do some editors or journals pay for you to peer review? Another is, would human immunology consider publishing a list of reviewers' names, such as this acknowledgement of reviewers that was published in JCO Precision Oncology? And so could you guys talk a little bit about what are some of the ways journals are trying to acknowledge and reward reviewers for their time and their effort?
Yeah, as far as I know, I don't see any journal paying reviewers for the review process.
I wish they
Now,
paid me, right? I would be
yeah,
very rich.
maybe accepting for the what we call the predatory journals. They can pay you to do it, but in general, uh, the mainstream journals, I don't think will pay you for that. Then acknowledgement. Of course, uh, for example, Frontiers in Immunology puts the name of the handling editor on the manuscript itself, the who reviewed. Now that could be, it can be a double-edged sword, meaning the on the one hand, confidentiality is there of the reviewers and review process. At the same time, there is responsibility from the reviewers and the editors that to the authors be um, be a little more considerate or be fair. Now, like human immunology, I am sort of debating whether to start that. Maybe I was thinking of asking the attendees whether we should add the handling editor's name and the reviewer's name to the publication. I am seriously considering that for human immunology. I haven't decided yet, but I will consult with my colleagues much more extensively before doing any of that. Danilo, anything to add?
No, I think it's great because if the reviewer says, "Oh, I don't want my name to disclose," we just don't disclose. But if they want to, they're accepted. That would be a nice way to acknowledge the reviewers. That could be great. And also, there is like I think the question was mentioned. Oh, if the human immunology publishes a specific like list of the reviewers, maybe also that could be like an interesting way to do, just like, oh, this year of 2023, all those people reviewed to the journal and we acknowledge that reviewer. That could be something it could be done as well, I think. What do you think, James?
Yeah, you're right. AJT does that.
Yeah.
American Journal of Transplantation does that way.
Yeah.
All right. Another question we have is, Dr. Matthew mentioned publishing to qualify to be a reviewer. Do you need to be the principal author in order to qualify, or can you be somewhere else in the author list?
No, you don't have to be the principal author of any journal or any manuscript. You, as long as you are confident that you can give a fair review, you are welcome to take it. Now, we editors, what we do is, in general, we use the first author and the senior author, first or second and the senior author, because the middle authors may have contributed to different technique, for example, may not have much knowledge about that. So we also sort of filter out people like that. But in general, if you volunteer and you specifically say, my expertise is this, sure, that's a very easy way to become a reviewer.
Yeah, and sometimes also we invite the PI or the senior author, and they say, "Oh, there's this person in my lab. They have the expertise needed. Invite this person." And sometimes, many times, we do that. And sometimes because the PI is like vouching for the person, they know that they have the expertise, and maybe they did not have like a lot of publications as first author yet, but now we know that this person has expertise to review it.
All right. Another question, Dr. Mathew, you just mentioned, the main thing is a main question you have to ask yourself is if you're able to give a fair review. One of our questions is, do you recommend declining a review to review a manuscript when the authors are colleagues of yours or when you've published with them previously?
Yes, that is called conflict of interest.
Mm.
If you are previous co-author with the manuscript or others, in I think there is 3 or 5 years, especially for grant reviewing. NIH requires that grant reviewers should not be co-authors with uh, uh, the grant applicant within 3 or 5, I forgot, whatever.
I think it's
It is same rule applies here too. So you should decline if you have any conflict of interest. Having said that, you have published with the author 20 years ago. You can be fair. So there is no hard and fast rule, but recent publications together, no.
All right, our next two questions are related to the review process. One is, how do you deal with a situation where you have two reviewers, one has rejected the manuscript and the other has endorsed the manuscript? And then another is if the paper is resubmitted for revisions and a reviewer has requested additional experiments, what's the process for the response? So if the paper is resubmitted, does it go back to the original reviewers? Does it go to the same section editor or editor-in-chief?
Okay. Yes, when the revision is submitted, in most journals, it goes to the editor-in-chief who directs it to the section editor. Of course, there is different models for different journals. Sometimes it can go to the handling editor. So that, and then usually the editors would send it back to the same reviewers. Otherwise, it becomes a new review. That is not very helpful to the others. It can be confusing. It can distort the manuscript itself. So one of the things which we recommend, we do is we will ask the reviewers, okay, you had suggested certain things in the initial review. Stick with that. Do not ask for new additional stuff unless you missed something which is major. Otherwise, you just say, okay, the authors have taken care of all my critiques. They have satisfactorily answered the critiques, accept. Or it is not done, just mention it, tell it to the editor. So the editor decides. Now, what was the other question?
What do you do when your recommendations are split and one of your reviewers says yes, accept, and one says to reject it?
I personally, what would do is I would send it to a third reviewer, and then I myself will weigh in the reviews, and sort of I become even a fourth reviewer, unofficial. So then, based on that, make the decision.
And I can also say what I do, for example. Sometimes I have like two reviewers, one say reject, one say accept, or minor revision. But we also have to see why they're saying that. Sometimes, for example, we know that the reviewer one is an expert in all the method that's been done in the paper, and reviewer two is the more like a different aspect, and they're not looking to that. And maybe that would inform me that I can actually reject the paper right now because the expert in that is saying that is. But on the same time, the one that is saying to reject could just say, "Oh, to reject, I don't like it," or just doesn't give enough detail for that. So I will not weigh that recommendation that much because there is no actually grounds for reject or maybe accept because the reviewer actually did not add much information. Then you invite another person. So we always try to be as fair as possible. And sometimes the reviewer said, "Oh, there's a major problem here." And then when, as an editor, we go there and then we actually see that major problem there. And then that may be enough to reject the paper, but maybe sometimes not. Invite another third, maybe a fourth reviewer. Try to be as fair as possible because we want the paper to get accepted, but we also want to accept papers that should be accepted. And that's the way, the balance that we have.
All right, we're down to a few minutes, so we'll try to get at least one, if not two more questions in. One question is, what's the best way to review? And I think they're getting more at how do you construct your review? Is the platform in like a collaborative working environment, kind of like a Google Doc, where you can digitally read the manuscript and add comments or suggestions to the text, or is there a dedicated platform to write your review?
In general, at least for human immunology, there is no dedicated platform. So my recommendation is write your review as a Word document. That way, you are not just typing away and making all mistakes or spelling errors, all those things. You can correct yourself. Meaning, unless if you don't give a reasonably good review, the language itself you are using is not very good. It doesn't make a good impression on the authors or the editors. So I would recommend use for example, Word document, then copy and paste it into the system. Then also you can attach your document to the review. So that's another way. And editors can even share that document with the others.
And just to clarify a little bit, usually, at least in my experience, the submission platform, that is through the journal. So you're not just responding to the email that you received from the editor with your invitation and copying your review into that. You do actually have to go to the journal website to do that. We're solely referring to actually typing up your review. So,
Yeah, that's true.
okay, last 2 minutes, so maybe we can get this last quick question in. How do you define a predatory journal? Would a high manuscript acceptance rate indicate that a journal is predatory?
Predatory journals are fraudulent most of the time. And it's not about acceptance rate, but it's sometimes they don't even have peer review system. They just get a paper, they say that they're going to review and then just publish, and then you have to pay for it. So they're making money in a process that is not really scientific, it's not peer review. So it's not based on the acceptance rate, but it's actually if this actually is being reviewed by peers or not, and if it has like all the meets the criteria for the standards of scientific peer review process.
Then there is previously there used to be Beale's list of predatory journals. Some of the journals sued and he just sort of gave up. But there is a second generation type of website that lists which journals are really predatory. That's where I go to.
Thank you all so much. So this brings us to the end of our webinar today. Many thanks to our speakers, Drs. Mathew and Augusto, and thank you all so much for participating live today. We had a lot of really great questions. Again, this was recorded, so you'll be able to access it after this webinar. And in the chat, I've added a survey for the attendees. We'd really like to and plan to continue offering webinars. We'd like to hear about how you liked the event today, and then also what events you would like to see in the future. It's just a really quick 4-question survey. And with that, everybody have a really great day, and thank you so much again for joining.
Bye.
You're welcome to contact us, okay, reviewers.
Thank you.